I'm here today with Cohen. She is an MD and board certified rheumatologist, integrative medicine specialist, an environmental health expert specializing in arthritis, immune system disorders, and women's health. And I came across Ailey at a webinar that I was listening to called Non-Toxic Guide to Living Healthy in a Chemical World, which happens to also be the name of her book. And I don't know if you can see that, but it's called Non-Toxic Guide to Living Healthy in a Chemical World. It was on my shelves. And she co-authored it with Frederick von Saal. And we'll get into this a little bit. And I love Dr. Weil's Healthy Living Guides. You know, you have a lot of great education behind all of this. And obviously you're also an MD. And so thank you for taking the time to talk with me today, Ailey. And it's great to have you here.
Well, thanks for having me. You reached out, and I love that. I love when people are passionate about what they do, and you know, it's all about educating. So this is lovely. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Well, your book is so needed. I am going to tell everybody that I talk to, all my social, about it, because it is so important for people to really understand where we are in this world, living in such a chemical world. And so many people don't understand that we really have to take this in our own hands and protect ourselves, because we're really not being protected. And you get into that in a lot in the book. And it's helpful that your book would be so helpful for so many people to understand how they can detox their world and live a healthy life. So how do you want to tell me a little bit more about the book and how you started it? And
yeah, well, you know, this book is an offshoot from the textbook that Dr. von Saal and I wrote in 2017 that actually had 26 of the world's leading researchers in food additives, air quality, drinking water, EMF radiation. So we went from that textbook that we're very proud of, from Oxford University Press, into this series, which is also through Oxford University Press, but it's the consumer guidebooks, the consumer healthy living guidebooks through Dr. Weil. So, you know, we had this opportunity, just Fred and I, to put this together. And it was always my dream to put this together, even about 7 or 8 years ago when I thought I was ready to do it. It turns out that I really wasn't ready. And I think you're ready when you're ready, and now is the time to do it, which it's a blessing how things came together. But this book is really meant to be, as it's entitled, a guidebook. It's a guide. It's called Non-Toxic Guide to Living Healthy in a Chemical World. And we actually, backstory is that we had to fight very hard for the word guide, because the actual editors wanted it to be living healthy in a chemical world. And Fred and I fought tooth and nail to say, this is the first guidebook, first of its kind, that actually walks people through the solutions. So if you don't put the word guide, people feel like they're on their own. And so it's a metaphor for the whole book. The book is supposed to really talk about the problems. I want people to understand what the problems are, the regulation issues and the lack thereof, you know, for clean drinking water, for our cosmetics, our cleaning products, our food additives. I want people to understand the problem, but then I also want them to go full circle through the solutions. Because if you don't know what the full story is, you don't own it. You don't buy it. You don't buy into it. And I think that's how people make the best changes that are long-standing, is that they actually understand that this is a bigger problem than just making one change here and there on a whim. So it's a journey for anyone who picks it up. It is by no means shouty or judgmental. It is all about your own journey. Wherever you are on this, my journey was 9 years long. And I wanted people to know that they don't have to do this for 9 years to get the answers, that here's a book that actually has really practical information that anyone can afford, that anyone with any background in any kind of sciences or education can embrace. And that we really do have to do it, as you said, empower yourself to do these changes in a very reasonable and sane way, because the government is not, our government, our EPA and other regulatory bodies in the US do not manage chemicals. They do not require testing of ingredients before they go into our products. All of the products we love, cosmetics, food, cleaning, fabric chemicals, furniture chemicals, air quality chemicals. So we have to really think about what are the issues and then what to do about it. So the book is about solutions, do-it-yourself cosmetics and personal care products, do-it-yourself cleaning products. But if you don't want to do it yourself and make it yourself, hey, here are all the resources to look up those products and pick ones that are safer from vetted groups that do this for a living, that are really well vetted. So, it's really meant for every people.
Yeah, and I love what you touched on because you give a lot of options. And in the back, there was even the options of even when you're traveling, or when you go to the gym. And those you have to think about those things when you leave your house. There's things that you can avoid and change in your life too when it comes to chemicals affecting your body. So I thought those were really cool as well.
Yeah, and it really comes from my own experience. I mean, Fred is the maven on research. This is one of the most brilliant, renowned researchers. He's a neuro and reproductive biologist by training. He's an emeritus professor basically at University of Missouri. He's the guy that basically was responsible, his research along with his colleagues, for removing bisphenol A or BPA from baby bottles in 2012 in the US because of its health issues, its health, endocrine disruption ability, and yet we have BPA in our canned drinks, in our canned foods, and all our canned foods, and a variety of other areas. But, we really wanted people together. We wanted people to, know how to go through this in a reasonable way, to know the problems, to know the regulation issues, to know the lack thereof, and then really put into some, really good, ways to remove those exposures. And not just, in your home, but also in your workplace. When you travel, as you mentioned, there are things to think about that you can do better. It's not like anyone's going to get this perfect, right? There's no one who's going to remove every chemical. We have 90,000 chemicals that are now available in all of our products that we use and love every day. And they do get into our body. And they do potentially wreak havoc. And we have data and evidence to show that. Worldwide evidence, World Health Organization, American Academy of Pediatrics, Endocrine Society, American Academy of Obstetricians, Gynecologists. This is a real topic. And the goal is not to freak out, not to shut down, and create resistance. It's really to say, look, you want to fix your water? Here's a great chapter. Learn it from soup to nuts, figure it out, boom, you're done. And I walk through this whole book as a mom. I have a section on soccer turf and synthetic turf and what you should know about it. As a person who uses plenty of cosmetics or personal care products, I get my hair colored, I like to drink alcohol. There's a whole section on contamination in our beer and wine. Why not, right? Because we're walking through life exposed to these chemicals and a lot of normal behaviors that we experience every day. Why shouldn't we be thinking with those kind of lenses on?
Right, and I love what you said. You can pick and choose what you change, and you don't have to change everything all at once.
Correct.
And that is important because I think people get so overwhelmed with thinking they need to change everything, and you don't. And the good thing is, and you can probably add to this, but once you start changing, those levels of those chemicals that potentially are in your body will start to reduce.
Right. And we wanted those studies in the book. I think the best way to learn is to say, well, yeah, prove it. Where is there evidence? Now, there's not always evidence. There's not always $1 million studies because no one wants to pay for it. Okay, let's be clear on that. These are university, third-party research groups or nonprofits, and they're just not the manufacturing. They're not required to, so why would they spend the money? We're talking about groups that really have to battle through the system to prove that one compound is harmful to human health. But now we have so many that have been well tested, phthalates, which are a class of chemicals that, for instance, are in fragrance and perfumes that keep that fragrance preserved in products, all types of products. We have so many BPA and all the compounds of bisphenols. We have so much literature on heavy metals, lead, mercury. I mean, there's just so much to know, but you don't want to be overwhelmed. And so, it's just a matter of biting off little pieces and really relating that to your environment, and also understanding which studies show that when you reduce those exposures, you reduce potential harm and risk of developing chronic diseases from these exposures. And that's it. We, like, for instance, BPA, bisphenol A, I'll give a very simple example. Bisphenol A has a half-life of 6 to 8 hours. And a half-life means that if you stopped an exposure of BPA, it would break down in the human body in 6 to 8 hours, 50% of it. And then in 6 to 8 hours from now, another 50% would start to break down. And so over the course of maybe 2 days, more or less, you would get rid of that exposure to BPA out of your urine, which is where it's measured. So if you really do work on reducing can exposure, I mean, that was a great study that we put in the book about from Harvard School of Public Health, that just changing out canned soup that they compared to fresh soup in 75 participants, they had 1,100% reduction in BPA in their urine over 5 days. Actually, it's 5 in a washout and then 5 days. So essentially that behavior of turning towards frozen organics or fresh organic foods instead of canned foods or drinks can potentially reduce that exposure, which can then reduce exposure to a whole host of health or endocrine related conditions, primarily thyroid condition, fertility or infertility, growth and developmental issues in children, newborns, obesity, diabetes, autoimmune disease. So that's what we're showing, that you can reduce exposure, and that should reduce in some way your risk of developing those chronic illnesses. Not always. Life is combination. Whether you get sick is a combination of genetics, lifestyle, which is diet, nutrition, sleep, blah, 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 and environmental exposures. So that dance between all three is whether people really develop a disease. But what you can control is what we want to teach people how to control.
Right, which the book will help you get through that maze of eliminating chemicals in your life. Now, something interesting, I was listening to your podcast, and you were interviewing Fred, and he mentioned something about how the medical community, you're not necessarily trained in this world. And it's very interesting to me that I'm lucky because I actually, my general practitioner, he is. And so he is one of the rare ones, I guess, in Buffalo where I am. But I know there's not many of them.
Yeah.
And you're not trained at what Fred was saying that.
Yeah, well, compared to the general population, there's many, many fewer physicians that not only have the knowledge of environmental health, chemicals, and nutrition, but have the time to even share it with their patients. If you're an insurance-based, I mean, as a physician, I got out of the insurance world in order to be able to spend an hour with patients, because you don't get reimbursed for your time adequately enough, in the sense that you'd have to see 30 or 40 patients to make, say, the same amount as someone who does a little bit more of a cash base that spends more time. So these are the trade-offs, because the commercial insurance industry in medicine pretty much allows for 15-minute visits with your doctor. Maybe 20 if you're lucky, 30 for new patients, maybe 45 to an hour if you're lucky. And that's not spent entirely on conversation. A lot of it is getting vitals and getting history. So by the time you have usable, tangible information on diet, nutrition, sleep, chemicals, stress management, there's no time. And so that's why so many people are not learning this information. They have to kind of learn it outside of their traditional physician relationship. And it's a shame, because medical schools, which are primarily subsidized by pharma industry, they don't even teach nutrition right now in 2020. So I am going to repeat it again. Even the best medical schools in the United States get at most 5 hours of nutrition education in 4 years of medical school.
That is absolutely incredible.
So if you figure that is something that you can't even fight for and get, how could you argue that there should be a whole course on chemicals like BPA, phthalates, and heavy metals, and all these other environmental exposures, and how they affect human endocrine system and brain health and cognition and IQ and breast cancer risk? I mean, it's just it's so unbelievable to me. And I'm in this institution, and yet I'm trying to change it from the inside out. It's just a very uphill climb. It's an uphill climb.
Well, as Fred said, it's almost like the Wild West when it comes to safety of our food supply and products.
It is.
That's what I feel like it is too. When he said that, I'm like, oh my God, are we really in 2020 and this is still happening? That the chemicals are still, but and he also mentioned, and you can probably mention a little bit, but the FDA and the EPA are not staff. Of course, it's very political and the pressure on them, and they're afraid to tell the public that it's not safe. And I know there's a lot of products out there and a lot of chemicals that companies do not want to change them, because if they change them, then they're guilty.
Well, change them, and it's costly to change formulations, not only of food, but also of personal care products. I mean, just changing one ingredient in a shampoo is actually quite costly. And interestingly enough, there are companies that create totally different formulations for shampoo in the same company for Europe than they do in the US, because they know Europe has a much more rigorous vetting program for their chemicals that they put in their products, particularly personal care. So they've removed almost 1,200 harmful chemicals in the EU, European Union, whereas in the US, we've removed 5 chemicals since 1976. So we're in a totally, and because of all of this, and the reason it was so important to tell this in the beginning of the book was so that you listen and you hear and you get more proactive about why it's important to do it on an individual basis. Because if you're waiting for the legislation to change, and look, it may change, there are some positive things happening. I don't want to say everything is terrible, but it's not happening fast enough in my lifetime or your lifetime, Therese. So, the way I see it is, I'm seeing sicker and sicker patients as an autoimmune disease physician, as an anything physician. I'm seeing a lot of everything. And it's happening at younger ages. And the epidemiologic studies are showing this, that this is not just random genetic changes that's giving everyone obesity or infertility or autoimmune diseases or thyroid conditions in their 20s. This is really a new phenomenon that we're seeing sicker people at younger ages in a variety of different health issues. So, and what's interesting even with COVID, and I hate to bring in something so awful and daunting, but it's really been shown that these chemicals cause inflammation in the body. And when you're going into an exposure like COVID, where we now know the comorbidities increase risk of worse outcomes, ventilation issues, oxygenation, hospitalization, and even death, you really need to start to think, well, what is my baseline level of inflammation walking around in everyday life? And can I lower that inflammation by reducing chemicals that contribute to a lot of chronic health conditions? And listen, medications are life-saving. We have a whole chapter on medications, that some medications are not really worth taking, that they actually have risks of harm to them, and that there's so many other great substitutes that are less harmful. So I wanted people to have every option available in a reasonable way to set their bodies up for success. That's all. And that's why we wanted people to have the really good studies that are very well vetted.
Yeah, and you touched on something, because I'm glad you did, because I wanted to bring it up a little bit, because so many of these chemicals disrupt the immune system. And when you brought up COVID, I've been saying this for a long time with so many people that I work with and help, that you need to boost your immune system. And one way to do that is to get rid of as many chemicals as possible. And I'm a big proponent of air purifiers too, that help get rid of the chemicals in your house. So I'm so glad you touched on that, because from a medical standpoint, it's great to hear that from you. Now, what people can do is buy the guide that will help you live in a healthy and chemical-free world. Well, it'll never be chemical-free. It'll be. Can you sign mine for me through Zoom?
I will. I could if you want me to. But yeah, no, I appreciate. And listen, there's chapters in there that have to do with nutritional sufficiency, is what I call it. Is basically that we have a number of studies a number of studies showing that even what you eat in nutritional supplements or from good quality food can actually help you reduce the harm from these exposures. So it's not just what you remove from your food and from your life, but it's also the nutrition that humans have evolved with millions of years to combat environmental exposures. B9, folic acid, omegas. We talk about some of these nutrients and the studies that show how they offset some of the genetic harm from environmental exposures. So it's not just what you take away, which sometimes seems more obvious, it's what you actually feed the human body. I call it human fertilizer, to really make sure it's the strongest it can be in terms of preventing harm from those exposures. And there's some really interesting stuff, and it kind of goes along with a lot of the stuff we're talking about now with COVID in terms of which supplements to take, and vitamin D. D has over 400 immunologic benefits to the human body, and yet everyone walks around, including children who have no required testing or screening for vitamin D, which is absurd. Everyone walks around deficient in D. And if you can get that from food, if you can get that from supplements, that will help offset a lot of other problems that we're exposed to. So it's all tied together,
It is all tied together, and I highly suggest getting a highlighter as you go through this wonderful book and take notes, because even if you made a few changes here and there, it makes such a big difference in your health. And I think people will see that. So anything else you want to add to our...
Oh, I could be here all day, but I'll tell you my biggest beef. It's funny because people often ask me, out of all the things that you recommend, because there's a chapter on air quality, there's a whole chapter on EMF, radiation, and actually safe use of technology, which is great for kids, and understanding how radiation affects fertility and breast cancer risk and all that. But some people ask me, what is your biggest beef out of all of these topics? I mean, there are several of them. And I say, one of the biggest issues I have is clean drinking water. Because by body mass index, we consume more water in a day or 2 days than we do even food. In terms of, we can live without food for a week, we can't live without water with even a few days. So water by body mass index, considering our bodies are made of at least 80% water, we really have not paid a lot of attention to how dirty our water is in the US. And yes, it's better than a third world country, don't get me wrong, but we have 160,000 water treatment plants in the United States that serve about 75% of Americans. The rest are wells. And those 160,000 water treatment plants only follow a law by the Safe Drinking Water Act of 1974 that covers 91 chemicals, which means they are only obligated at those sites to look for 91 chemicals, check their levels, and remediate the problem if it's too high. Okay, now too high is also one of these things where you can argue about in terms of the EPA versus other researchers arguing what's safe in terms of levels. But 91 chemicals is so unbelievably low compared to what gets into our water systems. From lakes, from streams, from sewage. These are all sources of water that go through water treatment plants and then get sent to our homes. And so I spend a whole chapter with Fred. We talk about water filters and water regulation, and then we just give the punchlines, which are, here are some really reasonable water filters, why they matter, how inexpensive they are now, and how I think that that's a priority. I think that's a big priority in homes, besides just food, but water is really underestimated, I think, in terms of risk for human health conditions.
I am right on that with you. So is Erin Brockovich.
Yes, she is.
Yeah, oh yeah, she's huge about that. So I agree with that. So I'm so glad you asked yourself that question, because I get asked all the time, what is the biggest thing if you came into my house, what would you change? Water is, I usually divert to, I talk about the water, but my biggest thing that I love to tell people to change is their laundry soap and no dryer sheets, because they sleep in those chemicals. They push the chemicals throughout their whole entire house, and then the environment and your next door neighbors. So that's one of my biggest thing I try to change. All my friends are like,
My beef is also air fresheners. The billion-billion-dollar industry to stink up your house with chemicals that we inhale right into our bloodstream is just unbelievable. And even the commercials that have like a sink full of dirty dishes and dead fish, and they expect you to spray over it like it's going to go away. Like, clean up your sink. You know, it always makes me laugh. I'm like, why is there a dead fish in the sink? And they're all smiling because they're spraying something around it. I'm like, it's just so interesting to me. So that's what I say. Get rid of all that. I had a whole drawer of mountain breeze, ocean, you know, nature springs, you know, pumpkin spice. I mean, get rid of all that synthetic chemical that we really do believe. We breathe it right into our bloodstream, just like oxygen.
Yeah, you know, I woke up at 3 o'clock this morning and saw a girlfriend of mine posted on Instagram that she went through the line at Starbucks to get a peppermint mocha drink or whatever, and they gave her this great air freshener to hang from her car. She lives in Connecticut. She's got 2 kids. She's very healthy. I was up for the next 3 hours tweeting out to Starbucks and tweeting out to somebody that wrote an article, because it was all over the news yesterday, how this was such a great thing. I could see that marketing department. Let's give them these air fresheners so they love the smell of peppermint and mocha, so they come back more. And we know those are not made with essential oils. So hopefully you'll see in the news soon that I've blown up Starbucks. I'm going there tomorrow and I'm videotaping it. I am like crazed over this. I can't believe they're putting these. And she said, so the next morning she woke up and saw my tweet, my everything. She's like, oh my God, I've had it in the car for 5 minutes and I got so sick. I couldn't even believe I even thought that I could hang that from my car. And you know, you probably do once in a while. I'll get something. I'm like, oh my God, what am I putting that on my hands for? A lotion or something. Anyway, so yeah, fragrance and air fresheners is a huge.
It's a process. And you know, listen, so much of this we've grown up with. I mean, I grew up with junk food. It's only since 9 years ago that I really gave up Oreos and Cheese Whiz and, you know, plug-ins. And I'm still on a journey. My hair's still colored. I haven't gotten there yet. But you know, here's the thing, there's such low-hanging fruit that we can all hit and feel good. And you know, I just want people to know that what they're doing is not in vain, that there's just so much good science that shows that these behaviors make a difference. And you know, it's not expensive. Most of it is actually cost savings because you're not buying it and bringing it into your home to begin with, to be, you know, in it all the time. Opening windows, getting plants, air fresheners. You know, if you want to buy an
air purifier.
Thank you, air purifier. I mean, there's just so many things you can do that actually don't cost money.
Yeah.
And so I try to start with that because again, I'm trying to reach populations that aren't, you know, going to yoga classes necessarily every morning, who don't have, you know, maybe the income to buy organics 24/7. So we have a lot of options for people who don't buy organics and how to wash your produce without, you know, using baking soda and white vinegar. Or, you know, moms and dads who are taking their kids to soccer practices and, you know, and sports games and they're on synthetic turf. Well, you're not going to take your kid out of the game. I have 2 boys. But you're going to be very cognizant of how to wash those chemicals off, why it's important, because these are petroleum-based tire crumb. I just posted on this on the Smart Human, actually, on Instagram the other day. So, you know, I want people to have nuggets of meaningful information that they can just, you know, do real quick. And speaking of the Smart Human, I don't want to forget to say this. So my platform, The Smart Human, is on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and thesmarthuman.com. And I post Monday, Wednesday, Friday, more or less, on everything you can think of, but in nuggets, so that people have bulleted information, which is how I like to learn. Give me the problem, but then give me the bullets. Tell me the answer. Give me the Cliff Notes. Boy, that dates me, right? But Instagram is a little more fun and kitschy. It has a little more personality because there's younger people that are following. You got to keep them interested. Facebook is like really good, solid Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I'm really proud of Facebook too. So whatever you decide you can follow, you might learn a little bit of something throughout your week without really stressing too much about it.
Yep, smarthuman.com. I follow it. I'll put that on the notes and everything also. And help promote your book because I love what you're doing. And I really appreciate you taking the time to spend with me to talk about this.
Well, it's my pleasure. And like-minded people, I mean, it takes a village. I mean, it's not a cliche. It takes a village to really start moving the dial on this. And I think it's growing, it's gaining traction. And I think it's legitimately being supported by really good science. It has been and continues. And so it's just a matter of getting this into mainstream. I've decided to move more to the consumer through my social media than I was, lecturing to doctors for 5 years at grand rounds lectures, and no one really was that either interested or had the time or the capacity to, to integrate this into their practice. So I wasn't really happy with that response. So I have to focus on going to the consumer, and it's working. And that's where I'll continue to do most of my work, but I'm open to anything. I'm working on high school education, trying to get this into a national curriculum, working with major universities. So, we'll see where this goes. But again, it's all a touch point. Every one of us, anyone who's listening, you have relatives, kids, grandparents, everyone, friends. You have opportunities to intervene with all of the people around you. And it is quite an interesting ripple effect when you share with others what you're doing. And don't let it be said you can't move mountains with just one person. Margaret Mead, she's in the book. But the idea is that we can all make a difference,
We can, and everybody else can, and for our environment too. So
yeah,
you're doing something, good service for your home, yourself, but also for the environment. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it. This was fabulous. As I told you in my email, you made my day. You made my day again.
So sweet. So, when I get up to Buffalo, we'll have a drink one day.
Well, you better. You have an Airbnb to stay here with a HEPA air purifier in your room.
All right. Well, here's looking forward to 2021 and beyond, right?
Definitely. 2021, bring it on.
Bring it on. So thank you, Therese, for having me. And I appreciate you helping me to promote this book and the Smart Human platform and everything you do. So thanks for all of that.
You're welcome. Thank you.